How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, March 25th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Jadon Sancho. The elite English starting forward for Manchester United turned 22 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to focus in on what makes Jadon Sancho one of the world's best and one of the world's premier soccer players. I'm going to zoom in and look at what he's done on a micro level, game in, game out, season in, season out, to make himself stand out as one of the world's best in a sport where you literally have hundreds of thousands of people around the world competing for the very same handful of finite spots on the world's top teams. And I'm also going to take a step back and look at what his macro level on the game is, considering he's just turning 22. I think that Jadon Sancho has done a lot in professional soccer, and I think that he's also a long way from hitting his best. So I think that watching him on his ascent might actually be very impressive. To really kind of describe his game, he's a very smart, intelligent footballer. He's very controlled. Of course, he can dribble it incredibly well, but I think his defining characteristic are his passes. At the same time, he most definitely can drive. He's very smart, and he's very controlled in high pressure situations, which has led him to get an incredible amount of assists in the Bundesliga. I think once he figures it out, I think he's actually going to be a very serious problem once he actually gets his legs under him, but I think he's done more than enough to prove that he's that player up to this point. So, I digress. Originally from Camberwell, England, standing in at just under 6 feet tall. He would go on to get his youth career started with Manchester City, but however, he would get moved to Borussia Dortmund. He would sign for Borussia Dortmund as a teenager, and he would get his first call up in his first games as a professional for the Dortmund team in his age 17 season in 2017-2018, while he was being moved between Dortmund and the U19 squad. He only played one game for the U19 squad, scoring a goal, but he would go on to start 7 of the 12 games he played in the Bundesliga for a Borussia Dortmund team that will go on to finish 4th in the Bundesliga. Within that Bundesliga season, in those 12 games, Jadon Sancho would finish with a goal and 4 assists, which is a lot of goals or a lot of assists in those 12 matches played, considering he was a teenager. He would go on to do his best to really kind of help Dortmund, as the only matchups he would play for Dortmund would be in the Bundesliga. He would go on to be a bigger part of the Dortmund rotation, as his second season in Dortmund, his age 18 season in 2018-19. He would start 26 of the 34 matches for Dortmund, as he would become a full-time starter player for Dortmund. In this season, Dortmund will go on to finish as runners-up in the Bundesliga, as Dortmund as a club has not won the Bundesliga since 2012. In that season where Sancho would first finish as runners-up in the Bundesliga with Dortmund, he would finish with 12 goals and 14 assists. This is while he was still a teenager in 2018-19. He would go on to get considerations for the Golden Boy this year, as he was still considered one of the best, especially teenage players. Not that many teenage players can get a double-digit amount of goals or assists ever in any sport, but he did his best within the Bundesliga that year. He would go on to play 2 DFB Pokal games, as Dortmund would end up losing in the third round there. But in the they would end up making it to the round of 16 in the Champions League. Once they made it to the round of 16, they would end up getting knocked out by Tottenham, as Tottenham went all the way to the final just to lose to Liverpool. In that Champions League run, in the 7 games he played, he added a goal and an assist, as those would be his very first goals and assists of Champions League play. And those would just be his very first 2 seasons in Borussia Dortmund. His third season in Borussia Dortmund would be his age 19 season with the club. And before this season, he would go on to help Borussia Dortmund win the German Super Cup for that year. And following that, he would go on into his 3rd full season with Borussia Dortmund, his 2nd season as a full-time starter in 2019-20. This was the season where the end of the season was delayed because of COVID. He would start 25 of the 32 Bundesliga games in a season where Dortmund would go on to finish as runners-up for the 2nd year in a row behind Bayern Munich. In the Bundesliga, Jadon Sancho finished with 17 goals and 16 assists, which of course dwarfed what he did the year before, even though what he did the year before was astonishing. In his second full year as a starter, he would finish with 17 goals and 16 assists in the Bundesliga. He would go on to finish behind Thomas Muller in total assists, as Thomas Muller would actually break the Bundesliga record that year. But his 17 goals and 16 assists would be the first time he had at least 15 goals and or assists in a domestic season, as he would really put himself out there in the Bundesliga. He would go on to play, or at least even in the Super Cup where they would win, he even added a goal and an assist. In the Pokal, he would play 3 games in a stretch where Borussia Dortmund would lose in the third round again. In the DFL Super Cup, they would go on to beat Bayern Munich 2-0, as their goals came from Paco Alcácer in the 48th minute, as Sancho actually scored the second game to actually clinch that Super Cup win. But looking at how they would fare in Champions League in this 2019-2020 season, they would go on to lose in the round of 16 for the second year in a row, as in the round of 16, they would end up getting knocked out by Paris Saint-Germain. PSG would go all the way to the final, where PSG would lose in the final to Bayern off of 1 goal. But that would be how Dortmund's season would end that year. Following that, Jadon Sancho would return for his 4th and final season as a Borussia Dortmund player. In his 3rd season as a starter, he would start 24 of the 26 games he played, in a season where Dortmund would finish with the 3rd best record in the Bundesliga. Within the Bundesliga itself, he finished with 8 goals and 11 assists. His 11 assists would make it 3 years in a row that he would have a double-digit amount of assists within the Bundesliga itself. He would go on to play 6 games in the DFB Pokal, in a stretch where Borussia Dortmund would end up going all the way to the final and beating RB Leipzig. They won 4-1 in the final, as Jadon Sancho scored 2 of the team's goals, as Erling Haaland, their elite Norwegian striker, would score the other 2. That'll be the only time that they have won the Pokal since Jadon Sancho had been there, as the year they had won prior to that was the year before he was playing for Dortmund. And he would also go on to lead the DFB Pokal in scoring, as he had 6 goals alongside 4 assists. So he would be very incredible in that matchup. He would also play 6 games in a UEFA Champions League stretch that would see that would see Borussia Dortmund lose in the quarterfinals. In the quarterfinal round, they would lose to Man City, who made it all the way to the final just to lose to Chelsea. And they would end up being runners-up in the DFL Super Cup this year. They lost to Bayern 3-2. But following that season, after Jadon Sancho had won a DFL Super Cup and had been at least won a DFL Pokal, he will go on to leave Borussia Dortmund to go play at Manchester United. He will go on to sign a 5-year contract. As of course he is English, I imagine that Manchester United was always the club that he wanted to play for. But that transitions us into this current season that he's playing, and his age 21 season, in which he's turning 22 today. Jadon Sancho so far has started 16 of the 24 Premier League games he's played for a Manchester United club that is holding the 6th best record in England at the moment. Looking at where they're sitting right now, they're sitting a point behind 5th place Tottenham and a couple points ahead of 7th place West Ham. They sit 20 points out of 1st place. They sit 4 points out of a Champions League place with 1 more game played than 4th place Arsenal. And even taking a look at where they are in Champions League, they've already been eliminated in the round of 16 by Atletico Madrid. But within this Premier League season, he scored 3 goals and 3 assists, as he's still trying to figure out where his legs are underneath him. And then taking a look at how he was able to fare. Even before that, he was able to play 3 goals in the Euro Championship for England, as England made it to the final just to lose to Italy. But like I said, England would go on to make it through the draw. They would beat Germany 2-0. They would beat Ukraine 4-0 in the quarterfinals. They would beat Denmark 2-1 in the semis before drawing with Italy in the final. But of course, going back to how Jadon Sancho has fared this particular season, he would go on to add 1 goal in the 7 Champions League games that he's played, where Man U has just been knocked out. He's even added an FA Cup goal as Manchester United is still competing, at least within that tournament itself. And then taking a look at what Man U is to expect, of course, this season. They are still really competing for a Champions League bid, so that, of course, Jadon Sancho can give them at least the best help that he can give as they try to go at it for another continental title. But with that said, that's virtually all I need to say for Jadon Sancho, as he is 22. I think a lot of his game speaks for himself. And considering he's getting a lot better, I think that's very scary, considering as a teenager, he virtually terrorized the Bundesliga. I think that it'll be a matter of time before he figures it out. He's a very smart and crafty player who has a lot of control. And I can't wait to see what he's done by this time next year. But of course, once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on Saturday, March 26th. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with another episode tomorrow, and hopefully another episode next year on March 25th, 2023 for another elite segment for Jadon Sancho. Thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with another segment tomorrow. Peace out.